When people read the Bible, there are certain things that just raise questions. And some of these questions have been asked for centuries. A variety of answers have been provided over the centuries. And unbelievers sometimes raise these as objections. So today I want to look at one of the big questions that arises oftentimes when people come to the Bible. I'm going to read just 2 verses, and then we'll talk about the question. So in Genesis chapter 4, verse 16, Cain has killed his brother Abel, and God has spoken judgment on Cain and then given him a mark that people would not harm him when they found him. And then Genesis 4:16 says this, "Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. And when he built a city, he called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch." And then we get Enoch's kids and all the rest. So here's the question. Where did Cain get his wife? There have been a variety of proposed answers, and then I will attempt to answer this question myself. One of the proposed answers is that we actually have a lot of subhuman Neanderthal kind of people, and that God makes Adam and Eve after there have been millions of years of evolution, and Cain married one of them. So he married some hairy Neanderthal woman. I don't believe that at all. Neanderthals actually were fully human. So the idea that somehow they were subhuman or some kind of evolutionary chain holds no water, both genetically and everything we found in the fossil record. Some people believe that there were lots of human beings on the earth and that God selected Adam and Eve out of those, and so it would have been easy for Cain to find his wife. Both of those are based on a view of biological evolution, that human beings are a result of millions of years of evolution, and so it had lots of other people around, and Adam and Eve were not uniquely created at the beginning in God's image, but instead were the result of whether or not God oversaw the process or whatever. Because I don't hold to evolution really in any form, nothing really gets better. Ecclesiastes is pretty clear about that. Things don't get better. The way we do evil just changes. That's all. Instead of robbing people with a knife, we now rob them with a gun, but people still get robbed. So I don't believe that society gets better. I don't believe that people get better. I don't believe any of that. This doesn't fit science, doesn't fit observation. It certainly does not fit history or what Scripture teaches. So that leaves us with 2 people, Adam and Eve, and they have 2 sons, Cain and Abel, and now they have one son, Cain, and then he is driven out from the presence of the Lord, and they now have no children, so to speak. We're not told how long it is from the time that Cain leaves the presence of the Lord and people begin to show up. We're not even certain that Cain and Abel are the only of Adam and Eve's children at this point. They could have had a number of children. These are the only 2 that are named. In fact, that's kind of what I think, that there would have been a number of children and that Cain and Abel were the first 2, and Cain kills Abel, and then Cain is driven out, and then Seth is born as, for lack of better description, a replacement for Abel. So I think they may well have had other children, just aren't named because they're not necessary to the account that we have. So it is possible that Cain married a sister. At this point, there would have been really no genetic mutations that would have made it harmful for people this closely related. The law of Moses had not yet been given, so incest has not yet been designated as a sin. It could have been, and this is what I think, is very well could have been a niece or, somebody like that, a great niece. Remember, they lived for hundreds of years because the effects of sin accumulate over time. And so they've not accumulated enough either in terms of diseases and things like that and genetic anomalies. And mutations are pretty much 100% negative. That's one of the reasons why neo-Darwinism doesn't work But it could well have been a more distant relative that he has, and it could have been decades before someone showed up, before he met someone. The Bible doesn't say where Cain got his wife, but this is obviously where it happened. Now, I do want to, to me, that's the easy answer, that it was obviously some relative, fairly close relative, whether it's sister or niece or someone else. And it could have been 50, 75, 100 years that Cain is there living alone until others start to show up. We don't know. Here's what's interesting is that this is not a question that's ever addressed ever in history of the Bible. Like, the Bible doesn't see this as a problem. It just simply says that Cain knew his wife, and that's it. That's all we need to know, is that Cain knows his wife, and then we have the ending of the line of Cain. His genealogies run out to the end of chapter 4 through Lamech, and we see that people are getting worse, not better, as you move through Genesis 4 and 5. And so I think it's significant the Bible doesn't address it because the Bible doesn't view it as a problem, because it's not a problem. And so for people that try to raise this as, well, where did Cain get his wife? Well, it was someone over the course of several hundred years. It could have been thousands of people that had born. It could have multiplied fairly rapidly. And so there's no reason to think that there would not have been a number of people that Cain could have married. I do think it's interesting. Cain goes out from the presence of the Lord and dwells in Nod to the east of Eden. We don't know how far away that is. It is possible that Cain still had some contact even with other siblings and things. I'm not convinced of that. But that Cain goes off. He's kind of the wild man. He's the guy who's, kind of the rebel sort of guy. And so he leaves. And so whoever it is that he marries probably is that same kind of person who's left the family and gone exploring and found Cain, and probably has heard about Cain, probably heard the story of Cain and Abel. And so, oh, you're Uncle Cain. And that's how it kind of went. I think it's also interesting that it says that Cain planted a city. Remember that Abel roamed around because he watched the flocks, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. He was a, I'm going to stay right here kind of guy. I'm going to plant fields and cultivate them here. And so he built this city, obviously connected with farming that he was doing. Cain wanted to be settled there. And so here the rebel son has left and then settled. And that's one of the reasons why it probably was fairly easy for him to be found by whoever became his wife. Another thing we need to keep in mind is we're not told the ages of Cain and Abel. I think sometimes we get the idea, 30, 40 years old when this happens. Probably they're early teenagers, 14, 15, 16, when the events earlier in chapter 4 of Cain killing his brother Abel over his jealousy occurred. And so if we wait 50 years, Cain still could only be in his 60s, and he's going to live for several hundred. So it's very easy for him to find a wife and to produce offspring and see how that works. So I just want to I know this question people ask, where did Cain get his wife? We're thinking in kind of modern terms instead of ancient terms. And when you read the text carefully, it's not like Cain moved hundreds of miles away. He may have only moved a few miles away, but when you have to walk everywhere, and there are no cell phones or anything, that kind of cuts off all communication, so to speak. So he may not have been that far away. And so as Adam and Eve have more children, and then those children have children, and they begin to move out and expand, it probably would not have been that long before they encountered Cain, maybe only 3 or 4 decades before they ran into him. So I hope this helps you kind of answer that question. Where did Cain get his wife? Plus a few other things there that we see in the text. And so just wanted to, take a few minutes today and address this question that often occurs, but also address the fact that the Bible doesn't think it's a problem, so we should not think there's a problem either.